This is Mr. Golem, and today we're going to be using equations and proportions to solve percent word problems. Let's start first with the equation. At a conference, the organizer determined that 48% of the attendees were between the ages of 18 and 29. Since there were 216 attendees in this age range, their blank total attendees were. How many total attendees at the conference? Well, I know that 48%, I'm going to use the actual word, of the total attendees is 216. And so what I did here is I summarized the problem, but I made sure to use the words, and in fact, you probably don't need to write this on your paper, but when you say it out loud, it'll probably help you to write an equation. I used the word of and is. I know that 48% of the total is 216. Well, we know how to solve these equations or form these equations. 48% of the total, we don't know what the total is, is 216. Before we start solving our equation, though, we should definitely change this into a decimal. And so remember, percent means per 100. So if I divide 48 by 100 or move the decimal place 2 spots, I know that really I have 0.48n equals 216. Here I have a one-step equation. I'm going to go ahead and use my calculator this time on this problem. If I divide 216 by 0.48, I know that that means that the number of total attendees would be 450. Now let's think about if that makes sense or not. Does 216 seem like just a little below half of 450? I think it does. Because I know half of 450 is 225. We have 2% less than that, so 216, that would make sense. So I'm going to say there were 450 total attendees at the conference. Now I'm going to erase what I have here, so I hope you wrote that down. Pause it if you did not. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to solve using a proportion, okay? And so to solve using a proportion, what I'm going to start with is the percent I know. I know that if I represent 48 out of 100, I can compare it to, this 48% represents how many were between these ages. I know that so 48 for every 100 should equal 216 out of however many we're attending. So instead of thinking of it as an equation, what I could do is I could write it as what is also an equation, but I could write it as a proportion. Instead of using a question mark, I can just use a variable like n. Okay. This is an alternative to the equation approach. You can get the answer either way, but really, we're just comparing the ratio of the percent, 48 to 100, is as to 216 is to the total. Okay, and then it's just a matter of cross multiplying and dividing. 48n, when I cross multiply, that's how I solve proportions, equals 21,600. And again, it looks almost identical to my equation that I decided to write, except for I think that the decimal place was just moved 2 places over in both, which is just fine. I should get the same exact answer. In this case, since we just have 48 times n, I can divide both sides by 48, and I'll find that n equals 450. Okay, so it's just an alternative approach using proportions to solve that word problem. This problem says that the economy package of cups has 800 green cups. If the green cups are 40% of the total package, how many cups are in the package? Well, we can solve this again 2 ways. Let's go ahead and set up a proportion first, and we'll go with that one first, that method. I know that when I compare the percent, that's per 100. So I know that 40 per 100 represents the number of green cups to the total number of cups altogether. So in this case, it has 800 green cups, and this would represent down here the total number of cups there is altogether. So again, we're just making a comparison of 2 ratios, 40 to 100. That ratio came from the 40%, and that just means that there are 40 green cups for every 100 altogether. In this case, we have 40% of the total package. How many cups are in the package? Well, if there's 800 green, we need to know how many there are total. Okay, so we could set up a proportion like this, and instead of a question mark, of course, we would put a variable, n or x or whatever variable we decide. And in a proportion, we solve through cross multiplying. 40n equals 80,000. And it's just a matter of solving a one-step equation now. Divide both sides by 40. I know that n equals 2,000. And so that's one way or one approach that we could take to solving this problem. Another approach you could take is saying, okay, given this information, I know that 40% of the total is 800. Well, if I'm looking at my keywords here, 40% of the total that we don't know is 800, then I have an equation that I could solve. Change my percent to a decimal, 0.4. I could write 0.40, but that 0 is insignificant. So 0.4n equals 800. And if I divide both sides by 0.4, I will see that n again equals 2,000. Okay, so either way you do it, you can set up an equation or make a proportion comparing the two values, the ratio of the two, the percent compared to the total. You can get the same answer. Let's take a look at Joe's hot dog stand. It says that it's only open for lunch. Today's sales, 26% came from selling plain hot dogs. Since the hot dog stand made $45.50 from selling plain hot dogs, it made blank in total sales for the day. So again, let's incorporate the proportions first. Let's compare. It says 26% of the total came from plain hot dogs. So 26 out of every 100 hot dogs sold were plain. I can compare that to how much money they made. It looks like since the hot dog stand made a total of $45.50. Oh no, it didn't make a total of $45.50. They made $45.50 from plain hot dogs. That tells me that that's how much money they made from plain hot dogs. We need to know how much money it made in total sales. So again, we're comparing plain to total. 26 out of every 100, and how much money we made from the plain compared to the total amount of money we made. Now, because we don't know the total amount of money made, we can use a variable there. And because we have a proportion, we can cross multiply. 26n equals, when I multiply something by 100, I know it'll just move the decimal place 2 spots, 4,550. And when I solve this one-step equation, I divide both sides by 26, I see that the total amount of money made is $175. I could also set up an equation. 26% of the total money made is $45.50. Now I made sure that when I rewrote my smaller problem here that I use keywords like of and is. We've been practicing that. 26% of means multiply. The total that we don't know, n, is $45.50. Before we get too carried away, let's change our percent to a decimal. 0.26n equals $45.50. And again, if I divide both sides by 0.26, the inverse of multiply is divide, I get the same answer, 175. So $175. Either way you want to do it. Okay, you can use a proportion or you can think of it as an equation. This is the most challenging problem of the day. It says that the table shows the number of people that went to see a movie last week. These statements to complete the table. On Thursday, 30% of the moviegoers were male. Okay, so this represents 30%. On Friday, 70% of the moviegoers were male. This number represents 70%. On Saturday, 35% were female. And on Sunday, 90% were female. Okay, and the reason I'm associating those percentages with the males and the females is because I know altogether we need to have 100% between the males and the females. So I know that in this case, if 30% were male, that means 70% were female. If 70% were male, then 30% were female. And the same way the other way around. I need to have a total of 100% of the viewers. So in this case, I know that this number, if 35% are female, that means there's 65% left to be male. And if 90% are female, then this leaves 10% to be male. Okay? And so this is going to be a little bit of a tricky problem because what we need to figure out is the number of female or male audience members. So I'm going to use an equation actually to help me solve this problem. If I know that 30% of 345, of the total viewers is 345, then I can figure out how many total viewers there are. Okay, so we're going to try to figure out, find the total viewers for each day. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to try to figure out. Because if I know the total viewers, I can take away how many are male, and that'll be left with the female. So in this case, 30% of the total viewers is 345. 30% is 345. So 30% of the total, we don't know, I'm going to use the word T, the letter T, is 345. Well, I can solve this equation. 0.3T equals 345. And then I can solve by division. One-step equation. T must equal, or the total number of viewers was 1,150. Well, it doesn't ask me how many total viewers there were. It just asks me how many female viewers there were. If I'm trying to fill out the chart, trying to figure out how many female. Well, if there's a total of 1,150 and 345 of them are males, that means if I subtract, I'll be left with the number of females. Looks like to me 805. Okay? And so the trick to this problem is going to be finding the total number of viewers. I'm going to go ahead and erase that, and I'm going to do another example. I'm going to skip ahead to the third part of the chart here. I'm going to go ahead and start working on this one next. I know that 35%, or 35 out of the 100, are females, but I have 280 females compared to the total. So I'm looking down here at this one. I'm going to solve it using a proportion instead. This represents 35%, or 35 out of 100. 35 compared to the total 100%. And in this case, we have 280 females compared to the total that we don't know. And so again, I can solve it a different way using cross multiplication. 35T equals 28,000. Divide both sides by 35. And now I know that T equals 800. Be careful though, because 800 doesn't represent the number of males there were. 800 represents how many there were altogether. So if there were 800 altogether, I could take away the 280 that were females and figure out how many male viewers there were. Looks like 520 male viewers. One good way to check would be, 35 is 280, and 65 is almost twice as much as 35. So there should be almost twice as many male viewers as female viewers. And I think that makes sense of what we have there. Twice of 280 would be 560, but we don't quite have twice as much. So I think that our answer makes sense. Okay, so again, you can solve these problems today using either an equation or you can set up a proportion. The first ratio represents the percent. The second ratio needs to be written in order based on the same ratio with the total on the bottom. And that's it for today.